All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, my name is Lindsay Davies. I work with New Entry Sustainable Farming Project. I'm going to go over some housekeeping things before we get going. So please, on your screen, you can call using your computer. That's probably the easiest way to hear what's happening. You can also call in for audio using the number here and the access code. I also put this info into the chat box on the side, so in case something happens with your technical issues as we move forward, you can reference that. We also have the WebEx support line, which may be an option if you're having some significant issues. Again, wanted to draw the attention of the chat box over to the right-hand side. We won't be taking questions from you all as you're speaking, but just as you have questions, you can type them into the chat box, and at the end of the webinar, we'll read through those and have the presenters answer the questions. So you can save your questions until the end, or you can go ahead and put those in as we're going through. All right, well, thank you all for tuning in for this webinar. It's about the Farm Bill update and specifically focusing in on CFP and BFRDP applicants and grantees and what that means for you all. Again, my name is Lindsay Davies. I work with New Entry Sustainable Farming Project. I'm joined with Allison Goyne and Julie at National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition. Both of these women are very knowledgeable about BFRDP and Farm Bill status, so I'm very excited to have them here with us. I am recording this webinar, and it will be sent out to everyone along with resources that we mention, so you're able to reference those things as we move forward. So here's sort of the agenda for the webinar today. I'll introduce New Entry and what we're doing, and also highlight some specific resources that we have available for BFRDP and CFP applicants and grantees, and then hand it over to Julie, talk about the Farm Bill, what's at stake, and what we can all be doing to help move it forward. And then Allison will talk about some next steps you can be taking with your grant applications. And then at the end, we'll take some time for Q&A from the audience as well. So New Entry is a Massachusetts-based organization. We have Incubator Farm on site and also Food Hub, and I work in the national programs, helping to oversee different networks of organizations, Incubator Network and the Apprentice Network, and also working to provide support to BFRDP and CFP applicants and grantees. And here is my contact info at the bottom of this slide, and I'll send that out again after the webinar takes place. So just wanted to really briefly go over what we have available for BFRDP and CFP applicants and grantees. So the BFRDP stands for Beginning Farmer Rancher Development Program, and CFP is Community Food Projects. And so these have some overlap in their goals, but they are two distinct programs. And so the BFRDP is really working to support programs that train beginning farmers and ranchers, and CFP really focusing in on helping to address issues of food security to improve food systems. And so we have a BFRDP EET grant, which is Education Enhancement Team grant, to help support people who have never applied for a BFRDP or who have and have not been successful in receiving one. And so we've worked to really see the issues that those people face as they are applying for a BFRDP and have developed resources for those folks that are available on our website. One of those is an online self-assessment tool, really helps you see if you're ready to apply for a BFRDP grant. We also have previously recorded webinars on our website that you can check out, and a FAQ portal with frequently asked questions that people have about the BFRDP process. For CFP, we provide technical assistance if you're having questions or issues or want to talk with someone who's experienced with the CFP grant application, or if you currently have a CFP grant and you have questions, you can fill out a form on our website, and I'll send that out after the webinar. And I will recommend resources for you and then put you in touch with one of our TA providers that can really dive in and help you answer those questions that you're working with. Again, for CFP, we also have webinars on our site and also some great resource guides that I wanted to highlight, like how to navigate through the grants.gov website, how to put together your evaluations, et cetera, et cetera. So again, I'll send out links to all of these things, but just wanted to make you aware we do have a lot of resources available. All right, Allison, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Allison Gowan. I'm an independent consultant, and I've been working with New Entry. This is our third year working together on this BFRDP Educational Enhancement Team grant. So I definitely am experienced with the BFRDP program, but I have also worked with a dozen other USDA grant programs, including quite a bit with the Community Food Project program as well. So happy to collaborate on this webinar and just provide some tips for applicants. And I'm also available for organizations looking for more in-depth assistance. They can contact me privately and talk about your application plans.
Great, thank you. All right. So we're going to turn it over to Julie from National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition. Hey, Julie, are you there?
Lindsay, can you hear me?
Yeah. Can you hear Julie?
Yeah, I can't hear Julie, so I'm wondering if she's having some technical difficulties. Maybe we could just jump forward to my section about applicants, since, you know, it could go in any order, and then hopefully Julie can sort out her audio by the time I'm finished.
Sounds good. I'll give you the presenter ball and then I'll call Julie.
Do you know, okay, which number my slides begin at?
I will take you there. All right. Here's yours. Can you see that, Allison? Allison? Julie? Hey, Julie, are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I have no idea what happened. My phone decided it decided to cut out. So I'm here. I can take over unless you want to give the presentation.
I would rather your expertise.
Fantastic.
But thank
Sorry
you.
about that.
That's all right. So here's your slide. I'll just, for some reason, when I gave the presenter access to you, that's when it went dark. So I'll just advance your slides for you.
Okay, great. That works. So I'm Julie Obudzinski. I'm the Interim Policy Director with the National Sustainable Ag Coalition. As Lindsay already covered, kind of who we are, we're a grassroots coalition. We have about 120 organizations all across the ground, and the next slide actually shows it's a little bit of an outdated map, but we've got coverage all across country. Our members, a lot of them work on the ground with farmers. And the one thing I did want to note is this is where the idea came from for a program like the Beginning Farmer and Rancher Development Program. That's kind of how we work, as we talk to our members and we see what's going on the ground, where are the gaps, getting some really, really great ideas for what we should change in federal policy and what new programs we should create. So our members are an invaluable resource for our coalition. The next slide talks about some of the resources that we have at the National Sustainable Ag Coalition. I would encourage, especially folks who are on the ground that work directly with farmers, if you haven't already checked out our website, we do have a publications page. We do have a lot of helpful resources for farmers on how to apply to federal programs. I just included a few here. And one that I did want to mention, hopefully most folks have heard by now, about that Cultivating the Next Generation report, which is in the bottom right-hand corner. If not, and if you are thinking about applying for BFRDP, I highly recommend taking a look at that. We have a copy on our website. We led an evaluation. We also got an EET grant through BFRDP to evaluate the program, funded grants, and we actually contacted, many of you probably got an email from us, a survey. We wanted to know how the program was operating, success stories, best practices, so tons and tons of useful information and tips for grantees. So definitely check that out. All right, so let's talk about the Farm Bill. So let's see. I included a few slides. I'm going to run through these pretty quickly because I know that a lot of folks want to hear what is the latest with the Farm Bill, especially given the timing and what most folks have probably been hearing about in the news. But I did include a few background slides if folks aren't that familiar with what the Farm Bill is. Essentially, it's a very, very, very big piece of legislation, very comprehensive in nature. It essentially sets the rules of the road in terms of food and farm policy in our country. Typically, it is reauthorized about every 5 to 7 years. The reason it's up to 7 years is if we don't get one passed on time, then there certainly is a little bit of a lapse. But generally, each Farm Bill has authorizations and funding at a 5-year time frame. Just historical context, the first Farm Bill was passed in 1933, so that came out of the Dust Bowl, the Great Depression. It was the first time that the government got involved in agricultural policy. And then the last Farm Bill, for context, was passed in February of 2014. And I'll talk a little bit later about the context in terms of where we are right now and prospects for passing a new Farm Bill. And then just in terms of budget, which I think I'll talk about on the next slide, it is almost $1 trillion, and this is over 10 years. So it's certainly, it's a significant piece of legislation. And if you advance to the next slide, that slide. So this slide talks about, I always like to show this when I talk about the Farm Bill because a lot of folks haven't seen this and they have kind of a misperception of what the Farm Bill is, and it's all corn subsidies. It's not. About 80% is going to nutrition. You know, there's a lot of folks that have been advocating this is a food bill. Most of the funding does go to the food stamp program, which is now known as SNAP. You can see where the other big buckets of funding on the farm side. So that's everything that's not that big green pie slice, and so that's commodity programs. Those are your typical farm subsidy payments, and then crop insurance payments. We also subsidize farmers for their crop insurance bills. Conservation, so that's your programs like CFP, EQIP, any conservation funding. And then I did want to make a note is that big, no, not that big, that tiny, tiny, tiny sliver, it's blue, the other 1%, that's essentially all the other stuff that we care about. So the Beginning Farmer Program, the Farmers Markets programs, the organic research, all of that stuff, rural development, all of that is in that one tiny sliver. I put that in for context. It is, you know, when we talk about funding for these programs, even though we're talking about millions of dollars, it is a tiny, 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 tiny drop in the bucket. So putting that into context. So next slide, I think we see what we got on the next slide. Okay, yes, we're going to shift into talking about what is at stake and kind of what the status is with the current Farm Bill that is being debated. So a little bit of a context. I'm sure that a lot of folks know this, but just a good reminder of why should I care about the Farm Bill? I work with beginning farmers. What's in it for me? I compiled this list. This is not extensive. This is a few key examples whenever I talk about beginning farmer policies and why the Farm Bill matters for beginning farmers. Everything from loan programs, which are obviously so important for new farmers, whether it's buying land or operating capital. You know, if they are participating in crop insurance, all of that is governed. All of the rules are governed in the Farm Bill. If they want to do conservation on their farm, there's lots of federal programs that will help offset the cost of conservation. TA, obviously the Beginning Farmer and Rancher Development Program, Community Food Projects is authorized in the Farm Bill. Lots and lots of policies that are included in the Farm Bill that support the next generation of farmers. And actually one of the roles that we play at NSAC is looking through the Farm Bill and looking through every single title, every single program, and identifying where are there gaps where we could be establishing a new program that would fill a gap, or where are there policies or programs that are not working for beginning farmers, and how do we make them work better? So a lot of these programs are we now have thanks to the advocacy of our member groups on the ground. And then I did want to provide just a little bit of historical context specifically on the Beginning Farmer and Rancher Development Program, just to set folks up in terms of, you know, where did this program come from, where are we currently at, what's funding looking like. So in short, the program has been around for almost a decade now. It was originally created in the 2002 Farm Bill. We didn't get any funding until the next Farm Bill, which sometimes it's incremental progress. So each Farm Bill, we make a little bit more progress in terms of programs and policies that support the next generation. So 2008 was the first time that we got funding for the program, and we're now 10 years later. We've had almost 10 rounds of grants coming out. The initial funding was at $75 million. You'll see in 2014 we got that bumped up a little bit. It's kind of a false bump up because the 2008 Farm Bill actually only included funding for 4 years, whereas the 2014 included funding for 5 years. So it's held steady at around $20 million in grant funding each year. You'll notice 2013, we are now in the same situation that we were in 2013. So BFRDP currently is on hold. And the reason it's on hold is it is one of those programs that has 5-year authorization, 5-year funding through the Farm Bill. The 2014 Farm Bill that I mentioned earlier in my presentation expired at the end of the fiscal year, which was September 30th. So I'm sure a lot of folks that have been paying attention to the Farm Bill heard right before the elections, Congress chose not to do a new Farm Bill and not to extend the old bill. So we're kind of in this limbo land of we don't really have a farm bill that's governing farm policy in this country. It's created a lot of uncertainty for farmers across the country, especially everything that's been happening with the trade tariffs. You know, and there's a lot of speculation in terms of what is going to be the law of the land come January. You know, when it's really going to be important to get an extension passed. And I could go into why the logistics of why we actually don't have, why we're able to continue operating and offering some of these programs without an extension, but that would be an entirely different webinar. So just in short, we don't have a temporary bill. The old bill has lapsed, and we don't have a new bill. So we're in this limbo place where programs like BFRDP are on hold, and there's a lot of uncertainty in terms of the RFA timing, which I'll get into in a little bit. So the next slide is, the formatting is a little strange, but hopefully folks can read. I wanted to put some context on these programs that we've dubbed tiny but mighty programs. So every single program you see on this list, and there are actually a few others that I didn't put on this list, all of these programs are in the same scenario as BFRDP in that they only have funding through the Farm Bill for 5 years, and they only have authorization for 5 years. So what that means is if there is no Farm Bill, these programs essentially lose both their authorization and their funding. There's different types of funding, so that's in essence why some programs like the Community Food Projects is one of those, continue to operate even though we don't have a Farm Bill. SNAP, for example, is not shut down because we don't have a Farm Bill. Those are called mandatory entitlement programs. There's also discretionary programs which have funding through appropriations. So you can get really, really deep in the weeds really quickly. But in essence, these are the programs right now which are shut down because we don't have funding through the Farm Bill. So we've got Beginning Farmer and Rancher, the 2501 program, farmers markets, anybody that's applied to FML, FMPP, VAPG, the Value Added Producer Grants, food and security and nutrition incentives, organic research. A lot of these programs we are waiting on the next round of RFAs. Some of them do have discretionary funding, but there still may be a hold on the RFAs pending any additional funding coming through the Farm Bill. So the next slide, I wanted to get into a little bit of context in terms of how far are we from actually getting a new Farm Bill signed into law. I will say I didn't have a chance to update some of these dates. So for reference, it does give you a good sense of what are all the steps. This is kind of how a bill becomes a law. Going all the way back to what we learned in grade school. So this is it's still a simplified version. It's a little bit more detailed, but it essentially lines out all of the different steps that we need to take to get a new Farm Bill signed into law. The first two are done. So we have a bill that has been passed through both committees in the House and Senate. It's passed through the floor on both the House and Senate. So we're now at that middle stage, which is the conference committee. That's where the holdup has been. There's only been one formal meeting of the conference committee, and that happened earlier this fall. And then, especially with the elections, a lot of things went on hold. We let the old Farm Bill expire, and there have been ongoing negotiations, especially kicking up after the elections. And now that we've seen, there is going to be a change in the political makeup next year, specifically with the Democrats now having a majority in Congress next year. That has put a lot of pressure on House Republicans right now to come to the table and to negotiate a bill that'll be better than if they waited until next year. So we actually have, we're getting closer to a deal, but we still need to go through that conference committee. We still need to have whatever is reported out of the conference committee voted on by the full House, the same bill voted on by the full House, voted on by the full Senate, and then the last step is signed into law. This all needs to happen before December 31st for a few reasons. One, that is the end of the current Congress. So if it doesn't happen, I actually have a slide that walks through that scenario. But essentially, we start over. It's a new Congress, and there are a lot of policy implications that happen at the start of the new year, which would mean that we would need a Farm Bill or a temporary extension. So the next slide, I wanted to talk about just kind of current status. So I talked about this, the current Farm Bill that we have did expire on September 30th, talked about all the programs that have been shut down. So the deal that has supposedly been reached, there has been very, very little in the press in terms of what the actual detail is, what the deal is. We've heard, bits and rumors in terms of what is or is not going to happen. What are the changes with SNAP, which has been the big holdup so far. The big question that we still have is, can Congress actually get this done before the end of the year? One of the big questions is, how is it going to pass through the House, especially if there's a lot of Republicans that don't like the deal because there aren't major reforms to the SNAP program. There aren't reforms to commodity programs. A lot of Republicans are going to be hesitant to vote for that bill. So there's a lot of questions in terms of how is it actually going to get the votes that they need to pass. There's also appropriations and budget bills that are going. If anybody has heard any news about potential government shutdowns, that's what that's related to, and that could be a potential vehicle that you could actually tag the Farm Bill onto one of those bills if they're moving. So all that to say, we have about 2 weeks. This is always what Congress does around the holidays. They're now negotiating a 2-week budget extension, pushing that deadline up until December 21st. So we now have possibly until December 21st to get a Farm Bill passed. Obviously, folks don't want to stay in town around the holidays, so anytime you put a deadline on there when folks want to leave, it brings them to the negotiating table. And then I did put a link. This is a lot of information, I realize. We have a very, very active blog where, part of our role, or what we see our role is really translating what is happening in DC and what is relevant to folks out in the field, especially folks that work with farmers. So if you haven't already signed up, we do have a weekly roundup that we send out every Friday. That's a compilation of any updates. So you can definitely, if you want to get more in the weeds, we've got tons of analysis and reporting on our blog. All right, next slide, I wanted to just briefly walk through a few scenarios. So what happens, and specifically what happens to BFRDP and CFP and the other programs if we don't have a Farm Bill this year. In essence, we start over. It's a new Congress, so that means that we have to go through all of those pieces, all those stages that I just walked through that were done, that we've done this year, this Congress. We will have to start over from scratch next year. That's the big question is, will Congress technically follow that same path? There have been rumors that the House would just take up the Senate bill. There's a lot of questions around this scenario of what if we don't get a Farm Bill done this year and we have to start over next year. I did point to that we would need a temporary extension. The big question is, if any temporary extension is passed, that does not automatically bring back programs like BFRDP. That's what happened in 2013, where we had a temporary extension. It didn't provide funding for those programs, so those programs were actually on hold for a year and a half. That's why we didn't make any grants, or USDA didn't make any grants in 2013, because there was no money. So that's going to be the big question if we do shift into an extension scenario, is are we going to be able to get funding included in that extension for beginning farmers? In short, it's really, really, really hard to find that money and to get all of Congress to agree on that. Our members are certainly mobilized to do that, and we'll be pushing that if we do have to switch into an extension fight. And just the note again that there are some programs that they don't get all of their funding through the Farm Bill. So programs that are funded through the appropriations process, for example, which includes CFP, 2501, and VAPG, may still continue to operate in this scenario. So the next scenario is the optimistic scenario of what happens if we do get a Farm Bill this year. And if you can advance this slide. Cool, awesome. So what happens if we actually do get a Farm Bill this year? It is increasingly looking likely, but again, the big question is how is the Farm Bill actually going to pass in terms of what is the vehicle, how are we going to get the votes? But it is, there is positive momentum, so it certainly could happen. BFRDP, which is currently on hold, along with a lot of those other programs that I called the tiny but mighties, once we get a Farm Bill passed, all of those programs will be back up and running. Some of them will have more money if more money is provided in this Farm Bill. There will be lots and lots of changes in store. This is where we shift to Farm Bill implementation. It is super, super, super important. that is where the rubber meets the road in terms of the changes that Congress wants. How does USDA, and especially under this administration, how are they going to actually implement the changes that Congress has dictated? And in short, one of those changes, so the Senate bill proposes to combine the BFRDP program with another program, the 2501 program, to create this kind of new coordinated program. It's called the Farming Opportunities Training and Outreach Program, FOTO. We're hearing positive news that negotiations have settled on that Senate version. We haven't seen any of the details, but we are hopeful. And what that would mean is it would mean increased coordination between the two programs. We fought really, really hard. We heard from our members the match in BFRDP is really, really difficult, especially for limited resource organizations. So hopefully, if they settled on the Senate version, there would be no match. There would be new priorities on land tenure, succession planning, food safety, and a simplified application process for grants under $50,000. Again, all of these, I should have put an asterisk. None of these are guaranteed until we actually see the text, the details, and until we actually get a bill passed. But I did want to preview what some of the changes might be in FY19 if we are able to get a farm bill this year. And the other thing that I did want to mention that I kind of skipped over on one of the other slides is the funding piece. The Senate and the House take two very different approaches on the funding pieces. Not only does the House keep the two programs separate, it essentially maintains flat funding. So it would be funding current, similar to current levels. The Senate consolidates the two programs, coordinates them. They would still operate in their respective agencies and as distinct programs, but there would be coordination. But the Senate also would establish permanent funding. So what that means, even though there's not going to be a ton more money for BFRDP, it means we wouldn't have to come back in 5 years and wonder if the program is going to be around. So that permanent funding is super, super, super important. All right. Next slide. Okay, so now that is kind of where we are, what we're likely to see. So in terms of what you can do, I did include a few slides. I'm going to go through these quickly because I do want to get to the slides that talk about applications and grant writing. But I did want to provide some context just in terms of who is actually making decisions, and if anybody wants to, is feeling so inclined to talk to their member of Congress, giving you some context in terms of who's more influential, who are making these decisions. So these are the key players that are making the decisions on whether or not we're going to get an extension, whether or not we're going to get permanent funding for BFRDP. So the Farm Bill leaders, these are the chairs and ranking members of the House and Senate Ag Committees. Also the Farm Bill Conference Committee, and I did include a link to our blog where we outline every single member that sits on that conference committee has to sign off on the final agreement. Also members who sit just not generally on the agriculture committees are generally more influential, are more keyed up on some of these issues, and obviously party leadership. So the Democratic and Republican leadership in both the House and Senate, they're not getting involved in the super, super, super weedy details, but they can certainly speak for their caucus in terms of what the must-haves are in any bill. And then obviously the full Congress, everybody needs to vote on this piece of legislation. The President needs to sign it. And lots and lots of folks on the ground are key players as well in terms of making your interest known. So the next slide, just super quick in terms of, when we talk about advocacy, how to engage, these are kind of the 3 steps that we go through. In recommending, if you've never talked to your member before, these are some great steps to keep in mind. Listening, learning, seeing where are your members on these issues. Do they even know about the Beginning Farmer and Rancher Development Program? Educating your members of Congress, and this is super important. We have a lot of new members that are joining Congress next year. Some of those folks, very few of those folks ran on an agriculture platform, but there certainly there is potential to cultivate some of those new members to stand up and be champions on beginning farmers and some of the other issues. And then obviously the last one is making the ask. And the next slide just had a few more ideas on what to do now. We've been talking with our membership about this, and especially if you have gotten a grant recently, and it doesn't even need to be through BFRDP. It's a great example, but it could be CFP, it could be 2501, Farmers Market Promotion Program. anytime you get a grant, making as much noise as you can, and especially making that noise and sending a copy of that press release directly to your member of Congress. It could be, it could be multiple offices if you serve farmers in multiple different districts or across states. They love that information. They love to brag about getting federal funding and the impact of federal dollars. So being able to show what the impact is of a program and actually have a story and a farmer attached to it, that is hugely, hugely powerful. And let's see if I think on the next slide we can skip forward. So I wanted to include some links because this was an abbreviated presentation just in terms of where you can go for more information. Like I said before, we've got tons of policy news. Sign up for our roundup if you're curious on getting the news on what's happening with the farm bills. It's going to be a busy 2 weeks. So we're going to have a lot of information there. Action opportunities, and then we're on social media, Twitter, Facebook, et cetera. If that's your preferred mode of getting information, we do include information there to try to get the word out. And I think, Lindsay, do you want to do, yeah, we'll switch over. Allison, do you want to take the next few slides?
Oh, I think she muted herself. Hey, Allison.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hello, yes.
Okay, great.
Welcome. So I'll advance your slides for you, Allison, since it doesn't seem to want anyone else to do it.
Okay, no problem. So thanks, Julie. That was really informative. And it's a difficult thing, of course, because there's so much uncertainty. But I think really the best way to go is to be prepared just in case, and better safe than sorry. I think the main message for people who are interested in these grant opportunities is that you can never start too early with your planning and preparation, and that you will not have enough time to put together a competitive proposal if you wait to start the process until the RFA is announced. So the clients, I've worked with 24 organizations across the country. The clients that I work with that have a lot of success with USDA grants, year after year in some cases, it's because they really plan ahead. One factor, there's others, but they start thinking well in advance, sometimes a year in advance, about which programs they want to apply to and, getting things together. So, I actually didn't know the piece that Julie just said about trying to get rid of the match in BFRDP. Mm-hmm. But other than that, I don't know of any drastic changes to BFRDP or CFP, maybe some, reorganization or combining. Same thing goes for local food programming. There was some talk about combining those, but as far as I've heard, and Julie can jump in here, I haven't heard of anything like extremely, drastic changes. So I think we can reasonably assume that both programs will maintain the same overall goals and a lot of the same structure. Let's see, why don't we go forward?
I would just add, even if that is true for BFRDP, it's not true for other programs. So if folks, for example, have gotten any grants through the farmers market or the local food promotion program or value-added producer grants, there's a major new program in the Senate Farm Bill called the Local Agriculture Marketing Program, the LAMP program. I would assume that there's folks on this call that are interested and or have participated in some of those programs. That one is going to be a much more comprehensive consolidation of existing programs and then even adding and building out. So that one's going to take a while to stand up, and we don't know. We have some of the same questions in terms of, when would an RFA come out, if there has to be a lot of program implementation in terms of setting up a new program. For the photo program that I mentioned, it is pretty much keeping the exact same statute, the exact same text of BFRDP, just moving it where it is so that it's combined with 2501. So we are not actually expecting there to be a lot of changes in the structure in the RFA. But again, you give USDA an entire farm bill that has tons and tons of changes, and they have to go through their process in terms of implementation and stakeholder input. So it really is, it's uncertain in terms of what that process and how long that's going to take.
Thanks, Julie. So I think given what Julie just said, and I know CFP does have that in some other sources of discretionary funding, and I believe that means that, because CFP, the way that CFP is set up, that program isn't going to change significantly either. So, and I think even with what Julie said regarding big changes to the local food programs, there is still at least some version of local food funding there, and it's not really the topic of this webinar, but I think that you're safe with starting conversations both within your organization and with your partners about potential USDA grant opportunities if you're interested in them, and how you might want to partner, particularly BFRDP and CFP. These are really collaborative programs. They both require collaboration. CFP requires a lot of kind of interdisciplinary collaboration. They want to see different parts of the food system represented in your project. And as anyone knows, in a nonprofit organization or any other kind of community organization,
All right, I think Allison got cut off, so I will just continue talking until she gets back on. This is Lindsay Davies. So what Allison was saying was take time right now to build those partnerships and get those relationships in place as you're planning your BFRDP or CFP grant. Also work to get your federal registration and SAM information processed. That can take some time, and I'll send out links to those websites where you can start to work on that if you haven't already. Just again, be sure to check out the new entry website, and I'll send out links to that with our resources that we have available. Can help you with planning and implementing your design. Also can help you get ready to figure out what your proposal will look like as well, and look at previous RFAs for these grant programs as well. All right. Again, start thinking about the match fund, especially for CFP required 100% match for the last RFA. And then we'll go ahead and take questions at this point. I've gotten a few that have been sent to me, so I will go ahead and read those that have come in.
Lindsay, I think I'm back in. This is Allison.
Hey. Yes.
I don't know what's the problem. I've been kicked out twice today. We've never had this happen before. So
I know. It's very weird. I apologize to all the participants about that, but thanks for bearing with us. So I sort of just went quickly through the rest of your slides, Allison, if you had anything else you wanted to add. But I was just going to jump in to the questions. I've gotten a few sent over to me. But again, thank you all for bearing with us. So I had a question from Andy Fisher. First of all, hi, Andy. Hope you're doing well. So Andy says, assuming the Farm Bill passes in the lame duck, will NIFA be able to get RFAs for so many programs out quickly enough to be processed before the September 30th fiscal year deadline?
With that, in short, we don't know. One of the other complications for, I don't know how many folks have been following this issue, but USDA is actually proposing to relocate NIFA along with the Economic Research Service. Their proposal, they just actually closed their bids and they got over 134 locations that were interested in hosting the new NIFA. Their timeline was pretty aggressive in wanting to announce that decision early, they said in January. Now it's been kicked back till the end of the first quarter. We at NSAC and broadly within the research community have a lot of concerns about what it means to pull out two research agencies from the nation's capital. So aside from all of the other fundamental concerns that we have about that move, what we would expect is if they are going to move, there's going to be a massive loss of staff and of especially expertise. For folks that have been with NIFA, that understand grants management. So all that being said, you're throwing a new farm bill and all of these new programs to stand up. Some of them have to make changes. Some of them it's more money to get out the door in less than a fiscal year, and you're trying to completely reorganize the agency. I would expect a lot of delays and a lot of challenges coming into FY19 if they move forward, especially with the relocation.
Great, thank you. So I have one other question. If folks have other questions, you can send them directly to me or one of the other hosts, Allison or Julie, or to the whole group as well. So the other question I got was from Jessica. She says, does this affect only new grantees, or does it also affect existing multi-year grant contracts?
I would assume that question would mean, does the changes that are proposed in the Farm Bill affect new grantees or all? My understanding is all of the grants that have been made, so they've already been, the funding has been, even if it hasn't all been obligated or awarded at the door, it is pulled from the funding under the 2014 Farm Bill. So that being said, all of that funding has been made under the policies and the current law. So that would mean that any changes to the law would not impact current recipients. Again, I have not talked to USDA about that, but that is my understanding that the funding has already been, it's been pulled from 2014 funds, so the policies associated with that funding would be in place.
Yeah,
I can
confirm.
Mm-hmm.
This is Allison. I can confirm that if you have an active grant that was made, even if it was just made this past September, none of these changes or holds will affect your current grant. I have been in communication with a number of people at NIFA about that, and they have confirmed that that's the case. So if you've already been awarded a BFRDP or a CFP grant, you don't have anything to worry about. Your grant will continue as it was originally awarded.
Great, yes, that's what I've been told as well. All right, we have a question from Sue. She says, is there a chance that BFRDP could be eliminated altogether?
There's always a chance, but it's probably very unlikely at this point. It was included in both the House and Senate bill, so I think that lends itself. There is a lot of support across both chambers and across the aisle for the program. So I think that is very, very, very unlikely. The only thing that I think is still on the table is that funding could be on hold for an entire year if we do end up in an extension scenario.
Mm. All right, Allison and Julie, did anyone send any questions to you specifically?
I got a question about clarifying the certainty around the CFP grant and when it would come out. And I actually double-checked this right before I jumped on the call, just because there hasn't been an RFA or RFP that's been released for the community food projects. It is not one of those programs that I mentioned, the Tiny But Mighties. And Allison, I don't know if you have any additional insight on timing, I just gave a call over to NIFA, and they said they're working on it. It is delayed compared to last year, but it's not being held up because of the inability to pass the Farm Bill. The funding comes directly out of SNAP, or it's funded through the same mechanism, so it wouldn't be in the same bucket. But he would not give me a definitive timing, except that it should be coming soon, and to sign up for NIFA updates so that folks can be aware of when it comes out.
Sorry, I was looking for questions in my box here, and I missed which program you were talking about, Finney?
The community food projects.
Oh, community food. Okay, yeah, then I have a question here too. Maybe you also saw that. That is Community Food Project going to be releasing? I have not heard. I was given conflicting information. When I asked a couple different people at NIFA about CFP, one person told me there's no funding because of the Farm Bill, and then that they didn't know of another funding source for the program. So maybe that person just did not know about the other funding options. So I have no definitive information, unfortunately.
And there may be, yeah, there may be, even in that scenario where there is authority and there is funding, you know, it may be that some agencies are choosing not to release because they don't know what the funding level necessarily is. So there may be changes that the Farm Bill makes to the funding, and they're reluctant to put out an RFA until they know what the definitive funding number is. So that may be one that they're waiting to see what the Farm Bill does.
Okay. Hopefully that answers the question here about CFP. I'm having a hard time seeing these questions. Someone has asked, if we have a current BFRDP, will we be eligible to apply for a potential RFA through the new photo program? I don't have a current 2501, although I've received one in the past. I don't know the answer for sure, but my guess would be if you have a current BFRDP program, even if you don't have a 2501 or a current grant, I doubt that you would be able to reapply for the new program until your current grant is complete, but that's just a guess. I don't know for sure.
Yeah, that would also be my assumption, but we'd have to clarify with program staff.
And then I've also seen, and maybe this is a question you were answering before when I was looking for questions, someone who applied for a CFP grant in 2017 and maybe hasn't heard yet. Julie, do you know, I'm assuming they would have announced all the awards. They had to do it by September 30th to make sure it was under.
My understanding is the awards have already been made, so I would double check, you know, whoever the contact that was listed on your application. Sometimes it's somebody that's different and, you know, information got crossed, or if it was an email, it got, you know, lost. So double check the contact information, and then contact the program lead. So the name should be listed in the RFA, or if you just Google CFP NIFA. Yeah, because they did announce those awards for FY18.
Yeah.
Yes, they did.
Well. Okay, I don't see any other questions on my screen.
Cool. I don't have any others as well. Julie, did you have any?
Nope.
All right. Does anyone else want to send in a question really quickly? All right. Well, any parting words, Allison or Julie? I think the consensus is we're waiting to see what's going to happen. Help to contact your local folks, your local representatives to move things along and start planning your grants. And we will wait and see what happens.
Yeah, and one other thing I should note, we are going to have, once the bill is released, we're going to do a deep dive reading through the entire bill, and we will do analysis and have that all publicly available on our blog. So do look for that. Again, you can sign up either for our alerts or a roundup, but we will do a deep dive on kind of what does the Farm Bill mean for beginning farmers.
Oh, that'll be fantastic. Thank you.
Yep.
And thank you both for being here today. That was fantastic. I learned a ton. Thank you to all participants. I'll be emailing you all with resources and a link to this webinar as well. So, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.